Yeah, so I see it's 12:35, so we'll reconvene. What I said, good talking going on. All right, the board meeting will reconvene. We are going to take up the remaining items here, and I believe we are at item 9. Is that right? Did we get through item 8 entirely?
We are on item
Thank you.
9A, yes.
It's only 1-9, okay. The Department of Water Resources, we have a written report of their monthly activities, so we wanted to note that we did receive that. There will not be an oral companion to that. And so item A is information on the conversion of river stage measuring stations. And Mr. Russo, thank you for your patience in us getting to your item.
Oh,
Good
not at all.
afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Vice President Dolan and members of the board. My name is Mitch Russo. I am with the Hydrology and Flood Operations Office with DWR. I'm the River Forecasting Chief. And before I started, I want to say I did very much enjoy the listening session this morning. I was actually afraid that I was going to be responsible for sucking the energy out of the room with my topic, but nobody's here anyway, so. Anyway, but that said, it's my pleasure to provide this information item for you today. As you stated, it's an update and an overview of the department's efforts to update the stream flow measuring stations, the stream stage measuring stations to the North American Vertical Datum of 1988, which is the most current datum that anything that has a vertical elevation that that we need to know references. And so the state has been involved in updating all of its stations to this datum. Main purpose for that is, like I just stated, to have at least all of the California DWR gauges referencing the same zero reference, which is the zero of the NAVD 88. And currently, that's not the case. Not all of them do. A lot of them reference old datums, NGVD 29 as an example, some local datums that are referenced, and so it's kind of a mixed bag. And so the idea here is to, as far as the state's concerned, to make all of their gauges consistent and referencing the most current. This provides a lot of advantages, especially given that most of the studies of recent years have also been, where vertical elevations are concerned, they all reference NAV 88. This brings it all consistent with that. And so the data, primarily the data, the idea is that the data that's out there will then be also referencing the same datum. Recent LiDAR studies also reference this datum, and so this, like I said, it brings everything current. The important thing to know about this is that nothing physically is changing out in the field. The stations themselves are not really changing. They're just going to be reporting different information, a different number, if you will. This is a slide that details this has been an ongoing effort that the state has taken on. Back in 2006, about 44 gauges in the Delta area were updated to NAV 88. Four of them were National Weather Service forecast points. And we did so again in 2016 with the lower Sacramento American Feather, as well as the Sacramento Weir operating criteria was then updated to reference operational points based on NAV 88. And then this is the next wave of the next phase of that effort. In 2019, we intend to to update a number of other stations to NAV 88, primarily in the Upper Sacramento and the Feather Rivers. In total, there will be 21 gauging stations that will be updated to NAV 88. 12 of them are official National Weather Service forecast points, and then there's 9 other points that are reported by the Weather Service as well as CDEC, but are not necessarily official forecast points. In other words, they don't have necessarily a monitor or flood stages associated with them. And an example calculation from converting numbers from when referencing older data An example calculation there would be, say, a gauge used to reference NGVD 29. If one wanted to apply or convert that to NAV 88 going forward, or for the pass as well, that they would, there would be a correction factor that we have developed that should be applied and subtracted from the old datum to arrive at the current datum number. This is a map view of the stations that are in question that will be updated. As you can see, they run throughout the upper Sacramento above Tisdale and the Feather River below Oroville, as well as a couple of stations that the department owns in the upper Feather above Oroville. Where we are in this process, this is sort of a schedule overview. We are now basically in transitioning from quarter 2 to quarter 3 in our schedule. Back in the first quarter of this year, we were finalizing conversion values. The surveying for this work was done, performed last summer, and the conversion values were developed back then. They were finalized in the beginning of this year, and then we spent the larger portion of this year on sort of an outreach campaign to make sure that the stakeholders, the appropriate stakeholders, were informed of what it was we were doing and what might be the possible implications for their operations and emergency response. And so we've been doing that. I went to Orland and spoke to some of the stakeholders out there. We also did so in Yuba City, and then we developed a video presentation for the Upper Feather folks in the foothills and presented that to them. Much of what I'm presenting here was part of that.
How was your participation at those?
The participation has been very good. There's been I would say that at each of the Orland and the Yuba City meetings were pretty well attended by the emergency management community, the county OESs, and those representatives. I would say on average about anywhere from 8 to 10 people in total, and the information that we provided them was very well received, and they appreciated it and had a lot of positive feedback for us. So this is a reference on this slide. It actually references the date that this datum change will appear on CDEC, and that'll be October 1st of this year. I'm also providing an example here of the Sacramento River Red Bluff Diversion Dam, which we developed.
Doesn't exist.
The diversion dam, you mean?
Yeah. We still call it that, though.
The gauge is still there, yeah. The gauge is still there, and we're still reporting it, so, yeah.
Infrastructure's there.
Yeah. But at this location, the gauge that's there we'll be applying a negative 2.6 foot conversion factor, and given, and that will apply to all the reported data. It also applies to the changes, the appropriate changes to the monitor stage and the flood stage at those locations and everything. And these are example calculations of how to convert old data to new if one were to report entirely in NAV 88. Again, only the numbers are changing. This is a slide that emphasizes it. This is, I believe, Ord Ferry, where at this stage, pictured here, we would normally be where we would previously be reporting in USAID at 97.1 feet. The new datum, NAV 88, it would be 96.9, given the conversion factor that's applied there. Very close. Not a whole lot of change there. Even less of a change at Vina, where we're only changing it to 1/10 of a foot at this location. But here we are, middle fork of the Feather in Portola, and there's quite a dramatic shift that's applied here. This is one of those local datums that, I mean, it says here in NGVD 29, but it's actually adjusted from, this is not actually 11, or nearly 12 feet above zero. This is it's a local datum, and so the shift to NAV 88 will be at this location actually 48.55 for this event. Of course, practically they're probably going to be using some kind of a shorthand whenever they need to be aware of what the stage is there and everything. But in any case, we're all looking at all these stations are looking at the same zero, and that's the point. And actually, the Weather Service will be taking some actions when we apply these datum shifts. They'll be updating their internal documentation and what's called their E19, which if you go to their website and everything, it's sort of a list of impacts at these locations there where, at a certain stage, this happens. A road is flooded, as an example, or a trailer park gets flooded or something like that. There's a list of things, of events that happen at different stages that they call their E19s. And so those will all be changing and will be shifted up on their website. And they'll be training their staff both at the weather forecast offices and the CNRFC. And there's an outreach campaign that we've kind of been jointly doing as well. But it's in addition to the stakeholder meetings that we've had, there's the same presentation or something like it will be put out as an example at the preseason flood meetings. We're possibly going to have a poster at FMA, a lot of other places where we feel that people would need to know this information. And then, of course, model calibrations or the internal forecasting model will have to be adjusted as well. Yes, Mr. Countryman.
How you established the 88 elevation? Just briefly, what steps you did?
I am not a surveyor myself, but so I couldn't go into great detail on that subject. But we tasked our northern regional office up in Red Bluff, the staff that are trained to do this sort of surveying, as well as some staff from the North Central regional office over here in Bright. And they went out and found reference monuments to and then surveyed them, surveyed the actual a monument at the station that was already a reference point, surveyed that into Nav88 with
Set up
GPS.
their GPS and let it run for 6 hours or something?
Correct. Well, I don't know how long, but yeah, it was GPS provided. Yeah.
As long as the satellite lets them.
I mean, that's a great benefit, right? Because now
Yes.
other people can pick those points up and reestablish that elevation quite easily throughout an area, so.
Correct. You're correct in saying so. Yes. Thank you. As far as DWR is concerned, we have, in addition to the work that we've already done, now the NCRO staff, again, North Central Region Office, Northern Region Office, will be going out and actually repositioning the staff gauges that are at those locations to reflect Nav88. Actually going in and resetting the data collection platforms, or DCPs, and that effort is ongoing right now. The schedule right now is for that work to be largely complete by the end of August, and so they're resetting the data reporting at the locations, and in some cases they're actually reporting to CDEC right now that data, but CDEC has then reapplied an old, a conversion, kind of a back conversion, so that we don't actually report Nav88 until October 1st. And so that work is ongoing right now. And then again, as I pointed out, with the National Weather Service, we're also going out and doing outreach meetings to make sure that everybody that needs to know this information gets it. This is a sort of a relic slide from the presentation that we provided to the Upper Feather stakeholders, and it kind of outlines the questions that we would ask them to consider when understanding what this information is and how it's changing. How might it affect their flood hazard plans or their operating procedures for or emergency response, and who else needs to be informed? Think about who those secondary and tertiary stakeholders might be that also need this information. And so as a sort of a slide that would help, I guess, kind of goose them to think about other people that may need to know and other considerations that they might have to have. And I will finish this up with our contact information. I've been working with Boone Leck and Cindy Matthews principally on this effort, and so there's our contact information. Or, of course, if you have questions now, I'd be happy to take them. And I'd like to thank you for having me up here. Countryman.
It looks like there are, we'll start with Mr. Countryman, Mr. Ramirez, you, and then me.
The operating criteria for the Sacramento Weir, I'm not exactly sure what datum it's based on. Is that all being brought up to the NAV 88 and the rules written around NAV 88 so it's understandable?
Well, the O&M manual, to my understanding, has not been changed. However, the datum that we now operate to is NAV 88, and that's actually because that effort took place in 2016. We operated in 2017 with relative to the NAV 88, and also at that time, American River at 8th Street and Sacramento River at I Street. So especially at the Sacramento River at I Street, because that's part of the operating criteria is what the stage is there. They were also in NAV 88 at the time of the operation.
Do you know if the Corps' been asked to update the O&M manual for that?
I do not know if there's been an official request to do so.
Maybe our staff maybe can check with them. I think that if we're changing the datums out there, I think those manuals all need to be brought up to current status. So maybe Mike can check on that.
An interesting question. I mean, we certainly, the NAV 88 datum was referenced when operating in 2017. It could also be said that the previous datum plus the conversion was operated to. I guess both of those things are true, since there's been, as far as I understand, no actual change to the O&M manual.
Harris?
I just want to offer a word of support and encouragement. This is sort of a thankless activity, but super necessary.
Thank you.
So good luck and keep up the great work, and I'm sure things will turn, but it doesn't happen unless you guys actually go through the exercise, so appreciate the effort.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
And that's going to be published on CDEC also, because people that are used to looking at it a certain way will be able to go back and see what that conversion is. So I think that's a good thinking there.
Yes, I agree with you. It's on its face, it seems like a very simple addition, subtraction sort of function and everything, but in practice, it's very easy to misapply it and go the wrong direction with if you're not thinking about how the calculation should take.
And it changes at every latitude.
Correct. Yeah. Yes, and that's another benefit that I didn't state earlier and everything, is that when you have a number of stations on the same stream that are in series, now they're all referencing the same, whereas in the past they might not have been.
So I have three. I don't know if it's comments or just showing that I don't quite understand all this. Does this relate in any way to the legislation that's proceeding or has been adopted to have more gauge measurements?
This is separate from that. It's not. There's not a legislative mandate that I'm aware of for this work.
Okay.
It's something that we're interested in doing, and we think that the benefits are somewhat self-evident.
Well, the more information and more accuracy to current time is always helpful.
Absolutely.
I would think
Agreed.
all the local entities understand that. But I'm confused as to the really big change there at the Feather River at Portola. I don't know how that, it's like it used to be at 7.5 feet, now it's at 4,000 feet? Do I not read that right? What?
That's what it says. That's what it is, yeah.
Okay, well, I
So-
would think they might have known that with the flooding that does occur there regularly. cousins that live there. They know it floods all the time.
Right, and so that's, again, a really good reason for the outreach and everything of that. There's going to be a need for those who have responsibilities that are associated with what those gauges say, that they need to be aware of, okay, well, you know, I used to worry about things when the stream gauge got to, say, 18 feet. Now I got to worry about, what, 4,860? What does that mean? You know, so it's important for us to do this outreach and everything, and so we've been doing so. And like I pointed out, I think they'll probably employ some kind of a shorthand when it comes to emergency response and emergency communications that are relative to that.
If any of this has to go out to the media, there will be a little bit more orientation to, I don't want to diss the media in my area, but they tend to be less experienced.
Correct. I agree.
Charter stations. And the lower portion of your handout talks about not developed. Is that because they're under development, or they're just not going to be?
Are we talking about the, in reference to the monitor and flood stages?
Yes.
Right, okay, so that goes back to a distinction that I made earlier in the presentation, that it references whether or not these locations are National Weather Service,
I see.
what are called official forecast points.
Okay.
To briefly go over what an official forecast point means is that they have developed monitor stages and flood stages, and in some cases danger stages that are associated with that are largely created by the local agencies to alert them as to when they need to take some certain actions, and so there's a lot of criteria that would define an official forecast point versus a not official forecast point that I could get into, but the principal distinction is that one has monitor and flood stages associated with it, the other ones don't.
Thanks for reclarifying that.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Any audience members want to ask anything or comment? Oh, all right. I'll have another try at your last name.
Deirdre Desjardins,
Desjardins.
French.
Closer.
I just wanted to ask, how are the change in the gauge data going to be reflected in CDEC?
Going right there.
Okay, so in response to Deirdre's question, as we may be aware, CDEC reports raw data. It's not quality controlled. It's basically data that is sent to the server and is distributed to the website as it's reported. There is some effort to remove completely erroneous data, but there's no effort to try and do any fine tuning to it. It's reported as raw. And so what you will see on October 1st, when we flip the switch metaphorically, is that the data will just begin to report at the new elevation determined by NAV88, the NAV88 reference. And so again, to go back to the example of the middle fork of the Feather in Portola, that'll be quite the big jump. And so depending on your viewing window, you're going to see that jump. But in any case, whether it's a 0.1 foot jump or a 4,000 foot jump, the stations that you will be referencing when you go to CDEC will have a note applied to it. I don't know exactly where it's going to be on the site or on the page, but there will be a note there that will speak to the fact that on such and such date, gauge is now reporting in NAV88, and it will give you that same calculation, that same instruction on how to apply the old data in the old datum to NAV88 should you want to make it more cohesive.
Seems to answer that. Thank you. Anyone else? Do you have any more comments for us, Mr. Russo?
No, I do not, but I'm just, like I said, if, I have my contact information on that last slide. If there's, if anybody wanted to contact us with questions regarding this effort, we can be reached there.
You will.
Thank you again.
Thank you for the presentation information. Appreciate it. All right, now fun item. Item number 10 is board items. The first one is informational, item 10A, an overview of the process of the potential need for a resolution of necessity for the potential need for acquisition via eminent domain. And Andrea Buckley will introduce this.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Dolan, members of the board. My name is Andrea Buckley. I'm the Chief of the Environmental Services and Land Management Branch for the board. As you know, as part of the 2008 MOA with the board, DWR Division of Engineering Real Estate Branch provides real estate services to the board through the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District. I'd like to introduce the team who will be presenting and also have for supporting for questions. We have Matt DeGroot, Senior Right-of-Way Agent, who you may have remember gave a presentation on real estate acquisition processes in April of this year. We have Rachel Taylor, who's a Senior Legal Counsel for supporting the real estate branch. And giving the presentation today is Linus Paulus, who is the Supervising Right-of-Way Agent and Chief of Acquisitions for the real estate branch. If during the land acquisition process, negotiations with the landowner reach an impasse, the board may need to acquire property through the process of condemnation. It's been over 10 years since the board has exercised this authority, so we thought it best to provide you with some background on the procedure, as the board may be considering a resolution of necessity in the near future for the Lower Elkhorn Basin Setback Levy project. Those acquisitions and negotiations are still ongoing, so this presentation will be at a high-level overview of the process itself and not project-specific. So with that, Linus?
Thank you, Andrea. Vice President Dolan and members of the board. As Andrea said, my name is Linus Paulus. I am the Chief of the Acquisition and Appraisal Section for the Department of Water Resources. What that means to you is that I oversee not only the Central Valley Flood Protection Board Acquisition Unit, but also the State Water Project Acquisition Unit and the Appraisal Unit for the Real Estate Branch. Excuse me. It's been a while since I've come before this board. Actually, it's been since 2007, so I don't think any of you are familiar with me, but I'm now being introduced to you. As Andre said, this is a follow-up to Matt DeGroot's presentation in April. He kind of went over the acquisition process, but within that process is also the condemnation process, which was not touched upon in that presentation. And again, I'd like to just reiterate that we expect to come back to you in the near future for the Lower Elkhorn Basin Levee Setback Project, unless we're successful in our negotiations. So I'm going to keep this very high level. This will be a short presentation. I get you back on schedule. What I'm going to talk about are your authorities, give you some brief definitions for any of you that are not familiar with condemnation or eminent domain and the processes itself. An overview of the eminent domain process. We'll specifically talk about the board's role in the resolution of necessity hearing, and then also the considerations of the board at that hearing. So just broadly, the board is empowered with one of the greatest powers actually given to any entity in this country. It's the power of eminent domain, which is the right of the government to take private property for public use with just compensation. The words eminent domain and condemnation are often interchanged. Eminent domain is the power that the board has. Condemnation is the process by which eminent domain is exercised. And the board's primary role in this process is a resolution of necessity to adopt one. And the definition of that, it's the public entities or the board's formal decision to acquire property by eminent domain. The resolution of necessity must be adopted before the condemning agency, in this case the board, can commence an eminent domain action in court. And the Attorney General's office would commence that action through DWR for the board. So these are your authorities, or the condemnation authority starts at the highest level of the United States Constitution. It's followed up by the California Constitution. California Water Code 8590 gives the San Joaquin Drainage District, or Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District, the authority to acquire property. There's a blurb that shows what you may, or the district may acquire in terms of project needs, all lands, rights-of-way, easements, property, and material necessary for many structures such as bypasses, weirs, cuts, canals, levees, overflow channels, reservoirs, etc. A lot of words. Water Code 8593 essentially says that the board shall acquire the property in the name of the district. And then Water Code, or Code of Civil Procedure 1245-210 says that the Sacramento, or the Central Flood Protection Board shall issue resolutions of necessity in the name of the San Joaquin, or Sacramento San Joaquin Drainage District. And then the resolution of necessity process is defined in the following, in the codes 1245-240 through 270, which is your last. So it kind of starts at the top and it goes all the way through the process. That's all per code. Okay, a couple more definitions to help out with the next few slides. Just compensation, that's what must be paid when a property is acquired under eminent domain. The legislature has determined that that's the fair market value of the property to be acquired. An appraisal is what determines that fair market value. So that's independent of the acquisition process, or it's part of the process, but an appraiser that's not the land agent will typically value that property, and then the agent assigned would then make a first written offer to the landowner based upon the appraised value. That's kind of the beginning of the land acquisition process. So Matt DeGroot was here in April, went over this entire process with you. Where we're at today to discuss, we're really on number 4, where we're in negotiations for a lot of properties. And there's 3 ways you can get through the negotiation process. One is the owner accepts your offer, offer is accepted. The second is accepted as modified, i.e. the owner has their own appraisal done, it's reviewed and approved either by DWR or DGS, or you reach some type of settlement. And the third is condemnation, and we only pursue condemnation when we're at an impasse. That's a very important word. Also, condemnation may be necessary depending on the project schedule, because you have to go through certain steps in a timeline, and you have to certify your construction. So sometimes, or oftentimes, the construction schedule will define the condemnation schedule. Not that if you begin a condemnation process, that doesn't mean that negotiations will end. Negotiations continue throughout that process. We're always trying to settle. We're also trying to meet a deadline. Once an impasse is determined, the next step would be to do a notice of intent. We're going to not talk about 5 and 6 because that's just the acquisition process again. So the first step in the condemnation process is to send a letter notifying the landowner of the board's intent to adopt a resolution of necessity. That letter is sent officially by mail. The landowner has 15 days from receipt of that letter to respond to it, and they may request to be heard before the board in that response, or they may choose to respond in writing. The letter would be sent on Central Flood Protection Board letterhead, and historically those have been signed by the executive officer of the board, prepared by DWR.
And how do we know they received the,
I believe that question came up, Mr. Countryman, in our preparation meeting, and the letters are not sent certified, they're just sent standard mail. Pardon? Yes, it's the mailing of the letter, not the receipt of the letter that issues notice. So how do you prepare for this hearing? Well, we'll prepare a big package for you. That package is going to include a copy of the resolution itself. It'll include a staff report, project information and background. It'll have copies of CEQA compliance, including the notice of termination. We'll include an acquisition summary sheet identifying all the attempts to contact and all the correspondence with the landowner. The notice of intent will be included. We'll have an exhibit map that shows the property in relationship to the project and a copy of the proposed deed, be it a grant deed or an easement deed.
Linus, I just want to make sure that Board Member Countryman's question, did you understand the answer?
Don't know if they get the letter.
Well, the way the statute is written, it is, the 15 days is kicked off from the date of mailing.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
heard
but
what you
there's,
said.
yeah, okay. I just want to make sure that that was clear.
Just from a practical board perspective, it seems like we'd want to know they received it.
Those are very good questions.
I think at a minimum, that's what we would do, but board staff's practice has always been to follow up either with a phone call or some other type of outreach whenever we send those type of notices out.
I know, I don't want to take forever. Are you next? No. Just wants us done.
Go
I
ahead.
think I'm on.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
I'm ahead of you. Would we have a hearing for these folks? I mean, do they have the right to say, hey, wait a second, I want to come in front of you, or how does that work?
Absolutely. So when the board, as Linus was indicating, we have to send out notice that the board is going to hear and consider taking, adopting a resolution of necessity. So that's what the notice requirement is for, to provide them notice that this hearing is going to take place and they have an opportunity to be heard either in writing or by appearing in person. And so the 15 days is after the notice is mailed. They have 15 days within which to respond to that notice that they want to either be heard. And we would also obviously put in when we anticipate that the matter would be heard, so they know when to show up. So
I guess
yes,
to
there's an
Joe-
opportunity for them to be heard on the
To
matter.
Joe's point, it's kind of weird that we don't know if they got it or not, but I hear what you're saying, staff would follow up and do all that. Just in some weird, bizarre situation, we wouldn't want somebody never getting the document and we have a presentation and we vote to take somebody's property, right? That's not, in practicality, that's not going to happen.
Right, so the statute sets the floor, right? That's the minimum that we're required to do. Board staff's practice has always been to go above what is statutorily required to make sure that any, whether it be an enforcement action or any other type of action that requires notice, that the respondent is actually informed and has received the notice.
I'm going to go a little ad lib here, and I'm not an attorney, but in my experience as a right-of-way agent doing acquisitions for the state of California, if you send a landowner a notification by certified mail, they don't have to accept it, and that letter will come back to you saying, you know, refuse to sign, refuse to accept. So the statute may be written in such a way that sending the letter provides the legal notification, but we have no control of whether the landowner chooses to acknowledge that. So that's my own personal opinion, and I'm not an attorney, but I hope that maybe clarifies some of it. And we can definitely send it certified mail. We
agree.
have that process set up internally to do that very easily.
The act of mailing is typically a statutory allowance. Going beyond that is something that's a little more customer-friendly. But yes, people don't
Yeah.
have to take the mail.
And
just-
there's also
But you have to
process-
mail it. But it's my understanding that it would be very highly unusual that a landowner would not know that this is going to this process.
Yes. There's typically several conversations in advance saying that, helping the landowner understand that we reached an impasse and what the next steps are.
It's after every effort to appropriately negotiate a fair
Yes.
market value price.
That's correct. So, yes, at the hearing, the landowner has an opportunity to challenge the resolution of necessity, or the representative may choose to challenge it, and that's part of the process. But during the hearing, I'm on the next slide in front of me, but The board is going to be asked to make 4 considerations. And I'm going to paraphrase this rather than read it off of the slide, but essentially, the board needs to find that the project is necessary, that the property is necessary for the project, that the property acquired accomplishes the greatest public benefit with the least private injury, and that a first written offer has been made per the statutory requirement. And so that's not exactly what's on the screen, but those are the 4 general findings in terms of what the board will be asked to consider. The first 3 are typically handled through the CEQA process in terms of the analysis of the project alternatives. Therefore, the properties are identified and the rights are identified through that process. And then the real estate branch would certify that the offer had been made pursuant to the government code. And so my last slide is really just the condemnation process. We've already talked about impasse a few times. We talked about the notice of intent. We've talked about the RON hearing. Should the board adopt a resolution of necessity, the Attorney General's office would pursue or proceed with a lis pendens, which is essentially a cloud on title notifying other interested parties that the property is subject to a condemnation action. They would file a summons and complaint, which would not be by mail, it would be by a process server. The department may seek an order of possession to acquire the right to the property prior to the outcome of a trial in order to stay on schedule. Then there would be your discovery phase and a trial phase. And all throughout this process, the real estate branch and the legal team would continue to try to negotiate a settlement and avoid any of the next steps in this process in hopes of avoiding a public trial. It would be a jury trial. And with that, I'd just like to thank you for your time. Obviously, I'm here if you have any questions. And thanks again.
Questions?
I'm going to try to keep it short.
I understand it. You all?
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you.
Item 10B, fairly routine, right? Sorry. Item 10B is consideration of an approval of a letter to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for initiating the process of a programmatic 408 for the Yola Bypass Cash Slough Program.
Good afternoon, Vice President Dolan, board members. My name is Ruth Darling. I'm a program manager with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And I'm here today to talk to you about the programmatic 408 for the Yola Bypass Cash Slough Program. So the objective of today's presentation is to seek the board's approval of a no objection letter to the United States Army Corps of Engineers. The letter requests that the Army Corps of Engineers initiate a joint programmatic review of alterations to the Sacramento River Flood Control Project as part of the watershed-based master plan for the Yola Bypass Cash Slough program. So as you recall, Mary Jimenez and myself came to you in May to go over in pretty extensive detail what the Yola Bypass Cash Slough program is. And we mentioned I would be back for a follow-up request, requesting this letter be sent to the Army Corps, and so this is what today's presentation is. So just as a reminder, the Yola Bypass Cash Slough program is a proposed program within the Yola Bypass Cash Slough complex, consisting of a group of interrelated projects that together contribute to the multi-benefit objectives identified in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. So this is a programmatic approach to obtain 408 approvals, and this will assess the cumulative impacts of all the proposed projects, essentially the program itself, on the performance of the Sacramento River Flood Control Project. So the Army Corps of Engineers engineering circular that was released in September of 2018 describes a long-term, large-scale plan comprised of construction of multiple alterations occurring over time. So this is the vehicle we are using to seek 408 approvals for the proposed suite of projects identified in the program. As of now, we anticipate that the programmatic 408 activities will consist of a hydrologic and hydraulic work group. This will establish a hydraulic baseline and determine the best available hydraulic models to evaluate the cumulative effects resulting from the program. The work group will likely consist of subject matter experts from the board, the Army Corps of Engineers, and Department of Water Resources. We will also work to establish an ecosystem baseline. This will evaluate the this will help to evaluate the cumulative environmental effects resulting from the program. It'll also help to determine the measurable objectives mentioned in the conservation strategy for this region. In addition, an environmental documentation will have to be done. The board and the Army Corps of Engineers will analyze potential environmental impacts resulting from the program through compliance with CEQA and NEPA. So staff's recommendation is the board approve the no objection letter for the Yellow Bypass Cash Slough program, programmatic 408, in substantially the form provided. In addition, delegate the executive officer to sign and send the letter to the Army Corps of Engineers. And any questions?
Very clear. Thank you. Questions, comments?
It's not a
Mr.
question.
Ramirez or McDonald?
I'm going to channel Bill just for a second, because I
Okay.
know he's Mr. Yellow Bypass. And I'd be happy to move to approve the staff recommendation. I just wanted to note that this is a heavy lift and a pilot on all sides. And this is just the first step. But there's a lot of work to do, and us sending the letter, suggests that we're ready to start. So to be continued,
Right.
but this doesn't happen on its own or without some help. So, and it's a lot of different folks involved, not just us. But I appreciate you guys working hard and pulling it together and working with the department to bring it this far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold off on making that motion for Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, I concur. This is really an important for the Yolo bypass and for the whole flood control program. My question is, has it been determined what the date of the baseline will be yet?
The date has not been discussed. We've heard from the Army Corps of Engineers that it'll likely be federally authorized projects, so projects that have been in WRDAs. So not like Lower Elkhorn would not be in the baseline, but so projects that, yeah, essentially have been authorized in a WRDA.
So when you consider what goes on in the Yolo bypass, would the modifications to Folsom Reservoir be included or not included? Is it post that or pre that, or how are you?
The way I understand it, although a part of the work group is determining that hydraulic baseline, but just from initial talks with Army Corps staff that, yeah, the, common features and the JFP would be included in the baseline. Because it was authorized in
So
a
it's
WRDA.
already done. In other words, it's sort of like
Right.
from now going forward, is that the idea? Rather than starting before and saying like when the flood plan was adopted?
Right, I don't, and again, I hope we can have those discussions, thorough discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers, but that's just what I've been told so far, so.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be one of the products of the group, determining the baseline.
Right, yeah, the hydraulic and ecosystem baseline, it's a very important component of moving forward.
Anything else? We're ready for your motion. Forrest, Ramirez, McDonald. Any more discussion? You want to say aye or yes? It'll be a voice vote. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes unanimously by those present. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pretty short item for something as large as it is, so we will stay informed. Okay, we're now at the tail end, right? All right. 4. Item 11 is the series of executive officer reports. Board administration came yesterday, so that it is the most up-to-date. These are all written. Update of operations branch, of the plan implementation and compliance branch, environmental services, and land management branch. That's for our reading and comments, if we have any. I'll read that. Item 12, board comments, committee updates. So we'll start at my right. Mr. Ramirez? Nope, nothing. Lines? Mr.
Just one, and since Emma has left, the advisory committee has one member, and maybe there should be two, and maybe that could be passed along. We'd have a second member. Thank you.
We actually did add a second member. It's Board Vice President Dolan
And you told me that
in
now?
May.
You told me that in May?
Yes, you volunteered.
Oh. Sounds fine. All right, my report is I've been added to the advisory committee. All right, any other reports from board members? And we've been communicating that as this board meeting proceeded, so we're there. We have some upcoming meetings. Not all of us are going to all of them. As I understand it, it's just staff to the flood and stormwater management. Board members going?
I did not have any board members sign up for that. However, it's not too late if you would like to go. They still have blocks of room, and I can get anyone registered. I'm on that board, so the
Happy you're going.
the agenda should be out shortly. If there's something in particular that interests you, I'd be happy to even do a one-day registration. It is in Rancho Palos Verdes, so there'll be some travel. We do have 2 board members signed up for FMA. That's the San Diego trip. That's at this point, board members Countryman and Vice President Dolan. So anyone else who wants to go to that, please let me know as well, as soon as possible.
And for August, we will have our regular business meeting on August 30th. And we have no closed session, as we'd previously said. So we're at adjournment unless someone really wants to say something else. Meeting adjourned.